Robert Riggs, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I typically do a little bit of research with the form that you fill out, but you filled it out 30 minutes before coming, so I don't really know a lot.
Kind of tells you how my day was going, huh?
Okay, true crime reporter, and you have a podcast that does true crime?
The podcast is named True Crime Reporter. It is the only podcast in which we go behind the yellow crime scene tape. We think that a lot of the true crime podcasters are great pretenders. They've never been there. They've never done it. I have started a second season now with a former federal prosecutor. And so you will find that both of us have not only been inside the crime scene tape in many, many crimes, but we've come face to face in interviews with serial killers, mass murderers, child molesters, predators, sex predators, serial bank robbers, you name it. We've seen it. And I've been in almost every maximum security prison in the state of Texas, including the death chamber.
Crazy. What an intro.
So when we talk about it, we've been there. And when you hear one of our stories, we've been there, or the people we have on have been in there, and we know how to talk to them about the case.
So when you meet a serial killer, are they born that way, or are they just a normal person that got on the wrong path?
You know, that is the big debate, nature versus nurture. So I've got a good example, and it's the first season of our podcast is about a serial killer named Kenneth Allen McDuff. McDuff is the worst serial killer in the history of Texas, and perhaps one of the worst in U.S. history, and most people have never heard of him. He got overshadowed by events that occurred during his rampages. But one of the things you do find characteristic of psychopaths is that there's nothing in their eyes. You know, we always think of the eyes being a window into the soul, and it's just cold. There is nothing there. Certainly that was the case with him. We do know that his abuse of women and crime and violent crime started when he was a teenager, perhaps earlier. And he also came out of a hugely dysfunctional family in which there was molestations and extreme physical violence in the family.
Is that always the case?
It is a lot of the time. So then there is also research, you know, now that we're putting people in fMRIs, scans, and they're finding that there's a difference in the brain, slight physiological difference. But that's the big puzzle out there. And also we also know that the folks that study this, you know, that 2 to 3% of the population are psychopaths. They're not all criminals. I think anybody listening here would.
The rest are entrepreneurs, yeah.
Yeah, sure. CEOs, very successful, have no regard for people, and, you know, sometimes that makes them successful. But, you know, there are a number of people we probably have all crossed paths with, either significant others, girlfriends, boyfriends, or work colleagues, or even bosses that were psychopaths in the sense that there's no emotion. They're very controlling. They really do understand how to manipulate you. The serial killers, you know, their component is the actual physical violence. But we are surrounded by psychopaths.
Have you heard Dr. Amen tell the story of his nephew?
No.
So Dr. Amen is a guy who's done like 20,000 brain scans, has a book on it. And,
okay.
He's recently come out of like, hey, here's brain scans of 10,000 people that smoked weed and didn't. And the people that smoked weed, like it's doing a insane amount of harm to their brains. And like his clients are like Miley Cyrus and like people like that. And he's like, you know, like everybody was for him until he like came out against marijuana, and he was like, look, I'm just like a doctor doing research, and like here's what the research shows. And so he tells the story of his nephew started to act real like psychotic when he was like 10 or 11 years old, maybe a little younger. And you know, it was like talking about suicide. It was talking like he was drawing images of people killing each other, and just like just out of nowhere, like he like pushed a girl to the ground in class, and just no emotion, really strange, and he was like a normal kid. So he's like, I want to do a brain scan on him. So he does a brain scan, and he finds like a cyst in his brain that is, it turns out, was blocking to where he could feel emotions. And nobody would drain it. No, like he had to like go all around the country to find somebody that will drain the cyst. And finally somebody like removes it, drains it, whatever. I don't understand how brain stuff works. And then he's completely back to normal.
Wow.
And so he says, that day I realized the power of brain health and the power of like brain scans. But I always hear that, I'm thinking like, man, how many of these can be completely prevented? Like how many of these are just like somebody's physiologically, like, something grew in their head that changed who they were. And if it just got fixed, they would be back to normal.
Well, I knew some of the original FBI profilers that were in what was called the Behavioral Science Unit. There's a Netflix show loosely based on the life of one of them, or two of them, and one of which was John Douglas. The show's called Mindhunter. I turned it off after a few episodes. It kind of got a little
cheesy.
Well, yeah, Hollywood. I was like, there's a good story here. You didn't have to do this. But I do remember they would all talk about the homicidal triad they would see in young people, and that would be a case, their bedwetting, fire setting, and torturing animals, killing animals. And,
Avery.
Yeah, so in the case of McDuff, don't know about the bedwetting, but we do know that, in his childhood, his mother was complaining he was always breaking the necks of her chickens, torturing her chickens. And interestingly, later in his serial killer career, he would describe to accomplices that killing a woman is like breaking the neck of a chicken. And he was really big into physically choking them. Although he later said that the act of killing was very boring, he was classified as a sadistic sexual serial killer. And back when I was investigating him, I had help from Roy Hazelwood, of one of the original profilers at the FBI. And Roy was their expert on sex crimes and that sort of thing. And I remember Roy telling me, he said, well, you're on to the great white shark of serial killers. These are very rare, his type. They're difficult to catch, but they're into the torture. The sex is there. It's rape in every fashion, but it's also torture. It's about controlling when they die. And that was the nature of that beast, but it went back to him, talking about killing women like you kill a chicken.
So, how many serial killers or killers have you met in your life?
Oh, gosh. Maybe, I'm just trying to think, maybe around 10. I've also, I've sat in prison across some mass killers as well. God, I haven't kept a catalog of it. Maybe I should. After a while, this kind of takes a mental toll on you. But
so, do you see a progression where if somebody starts by like robbing a store, that in 30 years they end up being a murderer? Or do you think that they just become like, they just steal more, like they go from stealing candy to stealing cars, and they like stay in that lane of what their thing is?
I've seen it all over the place. It kind of depends on their life and background and what's going on in their family and stuff. But I don't think you could sit here and say that, every shoplifter becomes a car thief.
Now, I guess my thing is like, from non-psychopathic killers, it's a progression, right? Like they don't just start by killing somebody. Don't they start by doing other crimes and then just find themselves that far down the path?
Well, what I've seen in the sex offenders, and I learned this from the profilers, that there is a progression there. Oftentimes, a peeping Tom is a sex offender and a rapist in the making. But on the serial killers, it's kind of started with killing, and killing young. Yeah.
So crazy.
Yeah. And it is frightening. McDuff was an enormous man. He was 6'5", 260, all muscle. And he had enormous hands, huge hands. And what happened is that back in 1966, he abducted 3 teenagers over in Everman, located south of Fort Worth, who were sitting out, 2 boys and a girl, two cousins. One of the cousins, that was his girlfriend, and they were listening to music, sitting on the hood of the car listening to music, as teens did back then, at their high school. And McDuff was on the hunt. And he had already told other people he ran with that he'd already killed before this. And he snuck up, abducted them, executed the two boys, put them in the trunk of their car, and executed them with a pistol, a revolver. And then took the girl on down the road. And as a result of this, he became known as the broomstick killer. He had a jagged piece of broken broomstick in which he violated her with it. And then when he finished with her, he straddled her, put the broomstick across her neck, and crushed her larynx as his accomplice held down her flailing legs.
So he had accomplices.
Oh, yeah.
So this dude knew how to find the 3% of psychopaths?
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about it, is that he needed an audience. It was like performance art for him. Now, it has given us but he didn't learn, because when they're caught, they snitch on him, and that sent him to the death row in 1966. His accomplice literally broke down with friends and started crying, and because he couldn't take it, what he'd witnessed, couldn't take it. And the later accomplice, what I need to explain here, he's sent to the electric chair. He, in 1972, U.S. Supreme Court struck down the death penalty across the country, and everybody's sentences were commuted to life, which meant you left death row, but also you were eligible for parole. Now, no one imagined back then that these people on death row in Texas, and these were bad people. I mean, typically, most of them were in there for at least triple murders. And nobody imagined they would ever be paroled. But fast forward, in 1989, McDuff and 60 more death row inmates walk out of prison on parole secretly. And there was political corruption, and there was financial corruption. Money changed hands. And in his case, we know from people inside the family, they were putting together money to get him out. But literally the day after he walked out of prison, he had a big welcome home ceremony from his family, and the next day he's back to killing, first victim. And then how long was he in the run after that? So between October 1989 until May of 1992, when he was captured by U.S. Marshals in a nationwide manhunt, he was killing. And he would drive upwards of 500 miles a day looking for victims. and that's very typical of serial killers. They're always on the hunt. They're always looking.
How do they finance this?
Well, in his case, Mama was financing it. She was giving him money, buying him cars, and if you listen, I think it's around episode 6 of the podcast, we have a whole episode about Mama, and everybody talks about all of the investigators that dealt with her said she was the hardest and meanest woman they had ever dealt with in their careers. And I'm talking about marshals and homicide investigators had really dealt with tough people.
Yeah, because you asked me hey, how do you pay for this podcast? And it's well, I have 2 companies that I spend 60 hours a week working at to be able to do stuff like this. Yeah. So I'm okay, take out the 60 hours a week I put towards work and put that towards murder. I'd probably be a great murderer. I'm a pretty ambitious person, hardworking, but I don't know how I'd finance it.
Right. Well, Mama was buying him cars, buying him vehicles, gave him a credit card to use. Now, Mama, by the way, back in where they grew up in Central Texas, Rosebud, and he was called the bad boy of Rosebud, she was known as the pistol packing Mama, because if school teachers or the bus driver scolded her boy on the bus, she showed up with a revolver threatening him. And that town was terrified by this family forever. And now it's been interesting because now the podcast is being spun off into a documentary television series for a major streaming channel. And so we're out shooting, and I'm bringing together the people to be interviewed. And we went back to Rosebud all these years later. I mean, it's been 50 years since he was there. And we sat down with people in their late 70s and all at a local cafe, all of which have still seared into their memories as some horror story about that family and McDuff and the mother and the father and how they terrorized the community and stuff they did, and how he drove around on his motorcycle shooting up people's rural mailboxes and shooting their animals. And Mama was always, oh, my boy wouldn't do something like that. So, I even turned up in my investigation as a reporter. I dug into this 30 years ago as an investigative reporter and began investigating. We had a crime wave going on in Texas, of stranger on stranger. And I mean, it was bloody. You could not turn on the television, the radio, or open the morning paper, and it was some awful, heinous crime had been committed, typically stranger on stranger. And I had just come here. I'd been covering the White House and Congress and all, and I got a reassignment to kind of try to chill out, covering the legislature. But I get here, and, the other reporters weren't really noticing, and I think they'd become sort of anesthetized to it. As a fish know it's in water, they're seeing it every day. But I started seeing this, and I started talking to a member of the Senate, Ted Lyon, who's from Mesquite, a suburb of northern Dallas, who was the chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee, and he too was like puzzled. What's going on here? And because there was just a crime wave going on. And
all right, so away from him,
yeah,
how'd you get into this in the first place?
The story?
No, into journalism. Like, what was your intro into journalism, and then how'd you go into covering crime?
So I never took a journalism class in my life. Didn't major in journalism. Got a degree in architecture and construction from Texas A&M. Never had a writing class, none of that. But when I was a student at A&M, I became interested in politics, and there was a group of us that all kind of got the political bug. We were in the student senate together and stuff like that. One of them was Rick Perry, who later became governor of Texas. Rick was the head Yell leader, which was probably the most political position there then, because you had to get elected. And John Sharp.
My favorite about Rick Perry were his presidential commercials.
Yeah?
Did you ever see any of them?
Remind me.
So he thought his audience was Texas. So he didn't make, like, if you're making a political commercial for the U.S., you got to be a little broad.
Right.
So he comes out walking on a ranch, and he goes, they're trying to make gay marriage legal here in the U.S. They're trying to teach in your schools. They're trying not to let you have guns on you. Me, Rick Perry, as president, I'm not going to allow that. And I was like, man, for governor of Texas, amen. I was like, that's not going to fly. Like, he ran this just like super hard line conservative. And I was like, which I kind of resonate with. But at the same time, it's like, dude, that is not how you. And he came out on a ranch and a cowboy hat. And I was like, and I'm seeing this ad in Nashville. And I'm like, I don't, maybe he's just running in southern states. But it was, I always play the ad because it was so funny to me.
And then another friend there, a classmate, was John Sharp, who's currently the chancellor of A&M, but also was in the state senate and everything, and later state controller. And so I, 5 years architecture, and I left, and I went to work for Representative Wright Patman in Congress. I arrived in May of 1972. Mr. Patman had been there since 1929. He was the dean of the House, the longest-serving member. And in those days, power was divvied up by how long you had outlasted everybody. So Mr. Patman was chairman of about 4 powerful committees, especially the House Banking Committee. And shortly after I arrived, the Watergate break-in occurs, and he starts the first investigation. And I was a gopher. I was at the bottom of the pyramid of probably 200 staff or more above me, and I was just a gopher with a college degree, But they were trying to dig up stuff, and I'd be sent to the Library of Congress. And there was no internet in these days. You had to literally go find it, the physical document. And the Library of Congress it had in the back these level after level after level of wooden boxes of card files, the Dewey Decimal System. And there were thousands of these, thousands of them that you're going through there trying to find it. And if you needed a document like from the Securities and Exchange Commission, an 8K that would give you insight on what's going on at a company, you literally had to go to the archives and look through hundreds of files. Same at the Pentagon and everything else. I always said it was like that closing scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark of, where is the Ark? Well, it closes with that big wide view of there's hundreds and hundreds of boxes in a warehouse. It was kind of like, that's what it was like. But I had a knack, and I enjoyed doing it. And Mr. Patman started the Watergate investigation, what became the Watergate Committee, and then there was stuff spilling out of it. And I later found myself rising up and becoming the investigator for the Joint Committee on Defense Production, and we were investigating bribery and other stuff involving defense contractors that were spinning out of the Watergate investigation that they didn't have authority to investigate. And it was my good fortune that Mr. Patman's chief of staff had been in Washington forever. He'd worked in the Truman White House, had enormous experience, done everything. And so I had a great mentor. I had a great godfather there looking after me. Now, he almost fired me my third week on the job, but for smarting off. But I learned a lot of lessons. But in that job, as you can imagine, with Watergate going on, reporters were coming by wanting information, and it was the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, you name it. All of the networks were coming by, CBS. And I really respected what they did. I always felt like there was a lot of stuff left under the table in hearings that I just call me naive. I just thought, hey, look, the taxpayers are paying for this. They ought to know it all. I really believe they should have, unless it's classified, they should know it all.
Yeah.
And so, I came to a turning point. Mr. Patman passed away. You've lost your patronage position on the committee. There's a new team coming in. And I took a break. I went out with the Carter presidential campaign. I'd known Hamilton Jordan. This is the first campaign, and went out and did that. But then I really came back, was like, well, I got to grow up and decide what I want to do. My father had passed away. That was a big blow to us at a young age. But I thought about what had gone on. And again, it was my good fortune in networking. I mean, I have always been a networker. Everybody I met, I just would always saw the value of relationships, and I always found everybody interesting, just so interesting. Yeah, and one of those people was Bob Schieffer of CBS News. Bob was from Fort Worth. Bob was the congressional correspondent on those days for CBS. Now, you may know him later is that, he became the host of Face the Nation. He was the substitute anchor for the CBS Evening News between anchors, and recently retired. But, I'd met Bob, and I just went down to the Bureau to see Bob, and it was a whole Texas thing. It was a fellow Texan. And I don't know, in those days in Washington, that meant a lot. If you're from Texas, you felt like you had a friend in the desert, and same as being a graduate of A&M. But Bob helped me. And when I'd first gotten to Washington, I had met a political image maker doing commercials for politicians named Robert Squire. And Bob was kind of down on his luck, and he'd done some congressional campaigns. They lost. Nobody paid their bill, and his wife had left him and what have you. And Bob and I became acquainted, and I was also interested in filmmaking. Bob would later become the premier Democratic political consultant doing commercials. He did all of President Clinton's commercials, and he was really brilliant, and he was from Texas. And so these two men kind of took me under my arm. Bob taught me about, You need an audition tape. Well, chicken and the egg. How do you have an audition tape if you haven't been in the business? So Bob was coaching me on, how to present yourself on camera. And Bob Schieffer was helping me get that audition tape together and sneaking crews out to shoot stuff with me. And that got me a job. And I started in New York, covering the state legislature and state government and other things. But kind of the rest is history. That was the start of a 30-year run.
Wow. What are some of your highlights?
Well, the highlight in New York, of course, here I am in New York City with a, real Texas twang accent back then. And but it actually turned out to be helpful because it got people's attention. They're like, who's that guy? But into my 2.5 years there, I was doing investigative reporting, and I started winning a lot of awards. And I knew how to dig. I had a news director, late Rick Townley, who had been a celebrated writer at ABC News back in the day, and he really helped me on writing. And I broke a story. The 1980 Winter Olympics were just corrupt to the core. Insider bidding and bid rigging for contracts, safety defects because, contracts were being given out to cronies, as New York is. And so, for instance, I discovered that in the ice skating arena, they'd left out many of the structural members that if it had snowed, the roof would have collapsed. So I did a 10-part series, and out of that series, I won my first Columbia DuPont Journalism Award for investigative reporting, and that was kind of the equivalent in television of the Pulitzer. And with some irony, it was so interesting. My friend Bob Squire won a DuPont that same year for a documentary he did on William Faulkner, the writer. And so here we are years later. We're on stage, and in those days it was it was broadcast live, the award ceremony. And so from there, I went on to WFAA in Dallas, which in those days was the place you went if you wanted to be a network correspondent. It operated like a network. It had a huge budgets and it covered, all of North Texas and West Texas and all. It was a huge powerhouse in those days. The day I started, Scott Pelley started, who later became the anchor at CBS Evening News. There's just a long list of everybody. That's where you went. And then from there I went to CBS and worked for the station group. And but along the way I did everything. I did the 51-day siege of the Branch Davidians. I did the mass killing at the Luby's cafeteria, in which George Hanara drove his pickup through the front door at lunch and got out and just started murdering people with his semi-automatic weapons. At that point, it became the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. I did the Oklahoma City bombing. I was the first to report and go against the grain of everyone else that it was domestic terrorist. It was involved with militia groups because I'd been covering them. I'd been digging in it.
Yeah.
So those are a few of the high points. In 2003 with CBS, I was embedded with the lead unit for the invasion of Iraq, suffered the first casualties. I did a lot of terrorism reporting. My criminal justice reporting and the basis for the podcast of this Kenneth McDuff, that started back in 1991. And that went on for up through 1998. There was just a slew of corruption. And then so what happened is that I started moving into terrorism reporting. And this is 98. And it wasn't on anybody's radar screen. And I did a big investigative series about how the FBI and others were preparing for a weapons of mass destruction attack. And I went around the country doing it. I got a lot of criticism for it. People thought I was sensationalizing that. Oh, this couldn't happen here. And then, we know what happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen the documentary Icarus?
Sounds familiar.
It's the documentary of all the corruption for the Russian Olympics that led to them getting like banned from the Olympics and stuff.
I haven't, but I'll tell you, there was another Olympics in this country, all kinds of allegations of corruption. Maybe it was with one in Utah. But, I just kind of wondered if it was, these big things aren't just ripe for corruption. There's so much money being thrown around. They're doing it quickly,
In this case, Russia had all their athletes dope, and they built a machine that could break into because to test the blood, you have to or test the pee, you have to break the glass.
Yes.
So they broke a machine that could take the top off without breaking the glass, and so they could change out the pee.
Oh, gee.
And when they did forensic and like looked at, they could then, when they just examined it under a microscope, they could see how they were getting into it and how they were doing all of that. But they did this for essentially every single one of their athletes.
As only the Russians could.
Yeah. And essentially this documentary, covers like the guy that, was the first to kind of leak it. He had a heart attack randomly. With no prior health conditions, just in his home. So he was poisoned. And then the other guy is in witness protection, got to the U.S., and then has disappeared.
Well, never trust a umbrella made in Russia. You know how they would go around pricking people with poison in London.
So I don't know. That's a documentary that I can see you liking. That it won a bunch of awards. It was super good. So I kind of have this theory. The left says everybody on the right's the worst, and the right, everybody says everybody on the left is the worst. And I try to meet people in the middle, try to bring both sides together. So I often say this, that what both sides are forgetting is that a certain percentage of the population are psychopaths. And of those psychopaths, they're going to support their groups. So like every group is going to have crazy people in it because there's crazy people that exist in the world.
Well, I can see that. But I want to tell you, so I was a congressional staffer in the 70s, and then I was a congressional correspondent covering the President Reagan and President George H.W. Bush, covering that White House, covering Congress through the 80s. And everybody got along with each other. Now, it started to change with Newt Gingrich, and the Republicans really started pushing back. But they actually used to get things done. Now, the seniority system went away. I attribute a lot of the reason they got a lot done was that you had these senior members who had seen it all and had this power, and they just ram it home. And there was a lot of good done through that, as well as bad, but at least they got things done.
Yeah, I heard that like before you had to be in Washington, and now you can just fly there when you need to be. You don't have to live there. And that, like, so the families would be at the same schools together and the same events together, and like they would actually spend time together, and that was also a thing that changed.
Hey, they used to eat in the cafeteria together and stuff. But my wife, she worked for the late Senator Lloyd Benson, who was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, the Tax Writing Committee, one of the most powerful committees, and also chairman of the Intelligence Committee. And so it was kind of known as the cloakroom senator. Got along with everybody, respected by everybody, and everybody kind of got things done that way, horse trading. But now there's such a polarization on each side. And I feel like the parties are way more polarized than the middle of America, But personally, I'd like to see parties go away. I mean, I'd like to just see a list of candidates for the presidential election because I've felt for a number of years I had to select the least worst choice.
Yeah, there's this weird. It always scares me when people really love like the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. Like that's always really been strange to me, even as a kid, because it's like, well, like shouldn't we be voting for people?
Just to be a little cult-like.
My friend often says, like, look, like I was an Obama supporter, like first time around, and nothing in my beliefs have changed. And now I'm considered alt-right when none of my beliefs have changed. Nothing I stand for, nothing has changed. But it's just that this side has gone so much this way. And this side's actually like more come this way in his opinion, to where he's like, now I'm considered alt-right when like none of my beliefs have changed. And I think that's a really, interesting perspective to just see that like that the parties have just shifted a lot.
Yeah. Well, there's been a shift in the country. Before the election of President Trump, I have a good friend. We started in Washington together out of college, and he stayed. He's got one of the largest lobbying firms in the city. He's a Democrat, but his firm is half and half Republicans, half Democrats, because anybody with a Democratic association of the past can't go talk to a Republican member and vice versa. But before the election, he asked me who I thought was going to win, and I said, Trump. He was like, what are you smoking down there? And I said, I'm telling you, Trump. And then so the next morning after the election, he called me and went, how did you know that? What? And I said, because I don't live inside the Beltway, and I don't kind of drink the Kool-Aid you guys all drink all the time. I said, so here's how I know that. I said, John, you know I'm from Paris, Texas. You're from Texarkana, but you hadn't been home to Texarkana. But I go visit Paris, and I go to the Super Walmart. And I am around working folks, and they felt forgotten. And the jobs in that town have gone to China. Middle-class jobs that paid a lot of money and put money into the schools and charitable efforts and all, they're gone. And many of the small merchant businesses that were run by World War II veterans, they're all gone, and they're separate departments inside Walmart. All that money goes up to Arkansas. So people feel forgotten. Times aren't good in these places. And they're mad as hell, and they're not going to take it anymore. And so I said, I think this is what has happened. The Obama administration didn't really, reach out and take care of them. They all became cozy with China. And here we are. And now, China's our biggest adversary in the world. They're, and I know from my podcast and research, they're stealing our secrets left and right under our nose. We don't seem to be doing much about it. They're growing powerful over in Asia. And here we are, fighting with each other over, stupid stuff.
It's really scary. People want to be mad at Trump or be mad at Biden. And it's like, I don't think this is our real enemies compared to like what these other countries want to do to us.
Well, I know we've forgotten we have huge enemies. One of the big realizations for me is that, here I'm on the Joint Committee on Defense Production. I get a top secret security clearance there, and I'm the young kid in there. But everybody in there was from the intelligence community, military intelligence, the CIA, that'd been their past jobs. And I remember when I started reading reports, and in those days, it wasn't online. You couldn't have had a leak. When the classified material came over, armed escorts came with a briefcase handcuffed to their wrist. And there were, very secure safes in the offices and stuff. But I remember what hit me as just a kid from East Texas was like, oh my God, everybody wants our stuff. That's what it came down to. This was during the Cold War, but everybody wants what we have. We're the most prosperous country in the world, and they want it, and they will come and take it like a bully on any street if they think they can get away with it. And that's what really hit me. And I think people that citizens are largely naive to what goes on behind the scenes and how these constant, spy versus spy and all of that plays out, that they're naive. It is a really nasty, ugly war against us by these tyrannies, be it Russia, North Korea, certainly China, other places in the Middle East. They want our stuff. It's that simple. It's just that simple. And they will come and take it.
Yeah. When I look at Afghanistan, I mean, I think that's like the biggest win for China. Like, I think if China can fund the Taliban and get in there, they can take all their natural resources because they're using all theirs. And it's, great. Because, I mean, if you look at how they're taking over Africa, it's pretty crazy.
And, of course, they're behind the Silk Road Initiative to go across northern Afghanistan. But remember, there's that old saying, Afghanistan is the graveyard of many superpowers. So who knows? I don't know if they'll do any better than anyone else has done.
I just love that we now negotiate with terrorists. Like, there is this idea that we don't negotiate with terrorists, but then when the Taliban took over, they were like, yeah, we're working directly with them to get our people out. It's like, what?
Well, one of my classmates from A&M was on the Joint Chiefs, first Aggie on the Joint Chiefs, and was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And we were talking about, he was appalled. He was like, what? We negotiate with terrorists? And my life was threatened by them when I was going there as a chief of staff. I was like, it's crazy. It's just like the world is upside down.
Yeah. I'm really, I had one of my friends, Jesse Stewart, on, who's was a U.S. Army Ranger, platoon leader, really, really good guy. And, his community of veterans is just like the suicide numbers. Like, his goal is to prevent, veteran suicide. And when they're seeing us just abandon everything, they're saying, okay, the country doesn't love me anymore.
You know what got me? Was it time to go? Yeah, but I don't know. I kept wondering, should we have kept at least a peacekeeping force there just as a tripwire? We did that in Europe against the Soviets for, decades. Yeah, but the way we bugged out. I mean, what did that tell the rest of the world in the stupid decisions? I mean, everybody I knew from around the military knew what was going on was like, we should have never given up Bagram. When we did, we should have kept it till the end. That would have been an escape point, a way to evacuate.
And when you look at, and I'm not saying Trump did a good job of this, but when you look at good leaders, they take ownership of what they do. And so to just see Biden just not put the blame on other people for everything. And then, unfortunately, I think the hardest thing is watching those Marines lose their life over this. It's like, this could have all been prevented if we just, Rand Paul is somebody who I enjoy his takes on things. And I thought the way he put it was just great, which is like, I've been against the war for 20 years. Like, I've always been against it. And he was like, but when it comes to pulling out, there's a way to do it and a way not to do it.
Right. I was personally outraged by what happened to those Marines after my years of covering terrorism. I'm like, what are you thinking, sticking those young men and women out there like that when we know about what goes on with roadside bombs and bombs in vehicles and all? They have no protection, nothing. It's chaos. I'm like, man. And we haven't broadcast it yet, but we've got a upcoming episode with a former counterintelligence officer with the Air Force who was in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's now in law enforcement as intelligence with the Sheriff's Department in Tarrant County. Probably one of the smartest hires they've ever made for gathering criminal intelligence here in Texas. But one of the things that he's warning is that all of these arms that we gave to the Afghan army, the up-armored vehicles, thousands of M16 rifles, every kind of weapon imaginable, are going to be on the international market for sale now. And he expects the cartels in Mexico are cleaning up. And, that it's never talked about. That's one of our biggest national security threats, certainly to Texas on the border, are the cartels. They're into everything. They're into 52 countries around the world.
Yeah, somebody explained, El Chapo, was that the guy?
Mm-hmm.
He was like, imagine running a company the size of FedEx.
Yes.
Completely in the dark. And when I've listened to podcasts on it where he bought 2 submarines so he could, transport drugs that way. And just the things they did and the money they made, but they did it all in the dark. And that's just like so crazy to me.
Well, and then they captured his son, and the president of Mexico capitulated after they were threatened and let him go. The people from the Department of Public Safety Intelligence here in Texas that I talk to, both former and current, really say there's a parallel government, that the cartels really run Mexico. Now, they're really in charge. And, they're into everything. We've got a fentanyl overdose epidemic through the roof in the States here. The Mexicans make it. That's where it comes from. And they're supplying it worldwide. And, there have been a number of initiatives or calls to designate the Mexican cartels and their leadership as foreign terrorists. And if we did, we would have a whole new set of powers of getting at their bank accounts, locking them down, because they have their money in this country. They'll live in this country too, their residences. But for some reason, nobody's got the political will to do it. So we do have these large threats around us, and we just seem blind to it. We're upset about. Because all Mexico's doing is just making money off of us and making us a worse nation, increasing our drug usage. They're not, tearing down our biggest building in New York City. Like it's a scope thing. It's like we always have shiny object syndrome. Yeah. They took our shiny object out, so but it's like you look at like I'm guessing all cocaine for the most part comes from Mexico, and all the vast majority of drugs in general come from Mexico. They're in control. They're it.
Yeah.
They're enormously powerful. They're international crime organizations in multiple countries.
Yeah, a good example is my friend was talking about, hey, I just had another friend die of COVID. Go get vaccinated. And I said, hey, man, I've had 3 friends die of COVID. 2 were vaccinated and got it from vaccinated people, because vaccinated people can get the virus and carry the virus, which doesn't make it sound like a vaccine, but that's neither here nor there. And I was like, so I think you should be mad at COVID. Like, you're mad at people that are unvaccinated. I was like, but the problem is that vaccinated people are getting the virus and then giving it to more vaccinated people who are dying of the virus. And so I think you should be mad at COVID itself. And that's kind of the same thing with this, is that people, they find the thing to be mad at, and it's really just a smokescreen. And I'm sure you, as an investigative reporter, often see right through the smokescreen from the start, because it's what you've been doing your whole life.
Well, let's go back to COVID a minute. So let's take the World Trade Centers. They're brought down by terrorists. More than 3,000 people are murdered. Well, think about the death toll of COVID around the world. In the wake of the World Trade Center, we had the commission, huge investigation, and the FBI and everybody sweeping out. No investigation into how did this come out of China.
The Wuhan
nothing.
COVID study lab.
Yeah. So we've answered none of those questions with a major investigation. I mean, where is the political will on both parties? Yeah. Where is it? That's the thing that perplexes me. If you look at the death toll of 9/11 and you look at the death toll of COVID, 9/11 just pales in comparison. No commission, no investigation.
Yeah. It's also really interesting that we've made everything political. And that is something that I started to see with social media when I was a kid, and with Obamacare, where I remember arguing with kids about Obamacare. And my thing is, I was a little kid when that came, essentially. I'm 27, so I was probably 12 or 13 when Obamacare was released. And all I remember was hearing that people had voted for the bill without reading all the way through, because it was 88,000 pages. And I just remember thinking, look, I probably thought I knew more than I did, like most 13-year-olds. But I still remember my central point was, we should never vote for something that we don't read.
Well, I hate to break it to you, that's pretty typical on all bills there. There's so much stuff. And typically what happens, members will look at another member they trust and say, I know they've read it, I know the details, I'm just going to follow their vote. So
when that member's looking at them
for other things. Yeah.
But
I saw that when I worked in Congress. I saw that, I knew members that they weren't up on defense, and they certainly weren't up on Vietnam and everything else going on. So they looked at other members that were on the committees, military affairs or the Defense Appropriations Committee, and they just followed their lead. But because there's just so much coming at them.
Are you for term limits?
Yes. Yeah. And the reason is, you can argue on one side that the time there, somebody's going to learn the system and how it works and learn, be educated about government. But what I hate has happened to the system is that these members literally every day of the week are trying to raise money. It's become so expensive, and they go off to offices on the Hill and they work the phones. And, look, you're in one sense, you are beholden. If somebody takes Nathan to the Dallas Cowboys game and free tickets, you feel an affinity for them. It's a relationship. It doesn't mean they're buying the vote, but it certainly means they'll have access in the office that the other side will not have. It's all about access and connections. But I think the system is really broken in the way these members have to, in some ways, humiliate themselves of always begging for money, asking for money. Somehow, I just think the system's got to deal with that, and maybe even have a shorter period of election. I don't know, where it's just it certainly broke. We really need to. I think as a society, we need to kind of examine this.
As a society, do you think we'll get back to voting on policy, or do you think that it's now just identity and who the person is from now on?
Well, the pendulum always swings around. The young people will say to me, things are so terrible right now, and I'll say, well, I do remember the days there were 150,000 young people marching in the streets against the Vietnam War in Washington, and clashes and stuff, and boy, you really thought that was bad. And then I remember the time in which there were, when I was a child, there were colored and white water fountains and restrooms and entrances, and look how far we've come from that. I'd like to say this too will pass. It might be pretty unpleasant until we get there and figure it out.
Yeah, that's, because that's what's always been so frustrating, especially the last election, is that, everybody went on who the person was, who Joe Biden was and who Donald Trump was. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm just looking at policies. I don't know if there's something I'm missing here. Like when I heard Joe Biden be like, I am going to pick a woman as my vice president, that's a promise. I'm like, what? It's not about if somebody's qualified or good. It's just you're it's kind of like I was working a consulting gig with a big startup, and he was like, yes, we know that we have too many white people in leadership, so we will be hiring some different ethnic groups for leadership. And I go, hey guys, that's illegal to hire somebody based on race. And that's not, maybe how he meant it, but it's exactly, he was like, hey guys, I see that we have too many white people here, so we got to change that. And I'm like, you can think that, but you can't say that. You can't hire somebody based on race. That's illegal. Right. And so I just see a bunch of just things based on things that don't actually matter. And I'm worried, are we going to continue to go down this path, or is this the breaking point of this now that's gotten that insane, and people are going to go back to, okay, I'm going to focus more on actual policies and actual facts and actual data, because there's so much, I think COVID's a really great example, but I still meet people that say, I had my Uber driver was telling me, he's like, this came from a bat. What's going to come from the next animal? And I was like, well, it came from a lab. And he was like, oh, no, that's a conspiracy theory. And I was like, no, it was a conspiracy theory, but now it's pretty much verified. And now it looks like Dr. Tony Fauci funded the lab that it came from, but it's neither here nor there.
Well, these are all questions, and these are reasons we need a investigating commission.
Yeah,
we need to get to the bottom of all of this, and we don't. And these, social media just propels misinformation and disinformation. Look at the Wall Street Journal's reporting on Facebook and what's been leaked out of Facebook, of what's gone on there. That they've known that Instagram is harmful to the mental health of girls 13 to 16. I think we all kind of knew that, but that the company knew it. That the company knew it and didn't tell anybody, and then had plans underway to roll out Instagram for children, which now they've backed off of. and now we are in such an environment, and they have such power that all of those of us that use social media for audience building and marketing, it's hard to say, it's kind of, you're like, ooh, should I be saying that? Because I'm going to go home and I'm turned off.
So, yeah, what are your thoughts on deplatforming people? There's this, I've been having this debate with a friend of mine of him saying, I think Trump's going to run again. And I think he's going to lose because he's not on social media, and he's not allowed to be on social media.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how can you not allow somebody who's how can you not allow a U.S. presidential candidate who is not a terrorist and doesn't promote terrorism? I don't know. How can you allow somebody we allow the leader of the Taliban to have his own Twitter account? So how can we allow it seems like you're kind of voting for the other, at that point you're if you have this kind of weight and you don't let the other side have a voice online, it seems like you're kind of rigging an election. I know I can't use that word.
I guess the lesson of all this to people has been, it is their platform.
Yeah.
It's a hugely powerful platform that probably, based on the leaks out of Facebook, that need to be examined by the government. Is it a monopoly somehow on information? Certainly it's a monopoly on attention. Is that illegal? I'll give you an interesting case that I'm involved in, and it is a business executive who's been doxxed and smeared by anonymous people that have set up anonymous accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Vimeo, you name it. And they use a fake name. And he wants to know who's done this to him, because it has had repercussions, because we live in an age now that if you make certain accusations about a person and they're online, people assume, oh, it's true. It's true. And so he literally, because some of these accusations got called in by the banks that he does business with and financing, wanting to re-examine their banking relationship. And he's like, it's fake. It's fake. So I've been working with a team trying to unmask, well, who is this? And it's in the court system. And Twitter has fought tooth and nail not to reveal who these people are, even to the point of arguing that under California law, and this is what they will invoke because they're out there, and it favors them. Under California law, our users have the right to anonymity, to which one of the attorneys in the case, who's been a federal prosecutor, responded and said, well, Osama bin Laden, he would love to hear. Yeah. I've come around to, even as a journalist, that, you need to put your driver's license up before you get an account. Now, what's so interesting, these companies, and Facebook fought long and hard on this too, and they finally released it, and it because they tried to, they have a process where they will notify the anonymous user of the account that there's litigation coming, and they will give them 30 days. They will give them 30 days to do something before they will tell us who it is. And fortunately for us, it went to a fake account. And so the email bounced back, and so Facebook released the information. The good news is that, people are lazy, and the person who had set up this Facebook account used their real phone number. It goes back to them. But the irony I find of all of this is that I have a Facebook ad account for my business, and in order to have that account, I've had to, they have my driver's license, they have my articles of incorporation, they have my financial information, but I could go out there saying and spreading anything, and they require no identity. But when it comes to their money, collecting their money, they want to know who you are.
It's so during the whole BLM movement, I just posted, I was like, hey guys, I don't think posting a black square on social media is going to prevent racism. And so a guy took that as that I was a white supremacist, which is obviously super easy to gather from me saying that posting on social media doesn't prevent hard social issues. And, and so he hired a team of people to call every one of our merchants that Rabbit is at and say that the CEO was a white supremacist and they needed to pull their units.
Wow.
Now, thankfully, because he was so proud of this and talked about it online, we just filed a lawsuit that hey, this guy is running our business and he's showing off and bragging about it. And then he dropped everything and everything got fixed.
Yeah.
But,
well, that's sort of we're in this age, certainly in social, where there's just these knee-jerk reactions and going off and not using critical thinking or thinking things through. And it's, I don't know how you put that genie back into the bottle,
yeah.
But it can have really unfortunate consequences to someone who's innocent.
Yeah, it's we're no longer innocent until proven guilty, and that's something that's really, really mind blowing to me, because I think that is one of the again another thing that makes America really special is that idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. And so when I looked at we'll go back to BLM, the officer that killed George Floyd, and how they everyone had decided he was guilty before there was a trial. Mm-hmm. And you can look at this, the fact that who's the girl that killed her daughter and somehow got away with it?
Oh, in Florida, I know.
Yeah. Holloway? No, that's that was the
talking about
Ruba girl.
Well, I'll say in the George Floyd case, I'm connected with lots of officers. I had lots of officers in internal affairs and familiar with use of force, and they were appalled with what they saw there.
Same.
They were just wow. And to them, it was symptomatic of a department who had big issues in training and everything else. From my perspective as a reporter, when these things have happened, and they're terrible. I mean, there's, and you'll see their city council members get outraged with the police and everything that's going on. And I want to say to them, wait a minute, that's your department. You hired the chief, you set the policy, and more importantly, you set the budget. And what I've found over the years is that they cut corners with the police in training and in background checks. And I would argue that if you really did thorough background checks before you handed these people authority and a badge and a gun and proper training, we wouldn't be seeing this stuff happen. But they go cheap. And we had on the podcast a veteran New York City detective, and he was talking about defund the police, and he worked the Bronx, and he said, here's what you're going to do. You're just going to cause more people to get murdered in the Bronx, because he said, so here's what we're going to do. You're cutting all the budget. So what are we going to do? We're going to hire way less qualified white Bubba guys when we ought to be hiring more qualified minorities and other races. But no, You cut the budget down, and so we're just going to kind of get the bottom of the barrel. You know, we don't think this through. It's just
and then we're not going to train the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah. And I saw so much about the inadequacy of training. Until we kind of come to grips with that, these things will happen.
Yeah, I mean, my point with George Floyd, it's not to say that the guy who killed him isn't guilty.
Yeah.
But it's to say you release the names of all the jurors. So they have to, like, because the public thinks he's guilty, and because you release the name of all the jurors, which then led to all their addresses being released. Like, if he's completely innocent, like completely, and obviously in that case there's video footage. Let's say there's no anything. He's completely innocent. I'm of course going to vote that he's guilty.
Yeah.
Because I have to, so my house doesn't get burned down. And so that's a really interesting social media thing that, like, social media is now kind of determining the outcome. So
suddenly everybody can kind of participate and express an opinion.
What do you think of this Gabby case?
Even though they have no expertise in it.
Listen to this, the Gabby Patino case. You know what I'm talking about? The 20-year-old who fiance came home without her.
Yeah, we my partner on the podcast, True Crime Reporter, we're working on doing just a real quick live episode on Fireside, Mark Cuban's platform, perhaps tonight, just talking about the aspects of it, of what we've seen in our careers. And so, for instance, answering a question, what is a person of interest? What does that mean? When you hear a person of interest, he's going to talk about it from the federal prosecutor, what that means. The allegations that the parents assisted him. What have we seen in similar cases? What happened? And if they did, what are the legal consequences for them? The search that took place of that residence. What is the type of evidence they're probably trying to collect that you need in the cases like this to see if determine if their charges should be filed? And then certainly with the reports about him, these are from our friends, him being a controlling personality and the allegations of domestic abuse. What do we see in the way she was murdered that would give us a hint of that and stuff? Really just kind of weighing in with sort of more information for people to think about it.
Yeah. Was it a mistake that he wasn't immediately brought in as a person of interest because he showed up with her vehicle and she wasn't there?
I don't think from what I've seen, I don't know that the investigation was. Remember, you got to have probable cause.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we've got a good example of that in our podcast about the serial killer. He's out of prison. He's got a record he's a serial killer out of prison. And in Waco, a young woman that's a convenience store clerk vanishes in the middle of the night. She and her car, her purse, everything else left in the store. And about 100 yards away in the parking lot of a motel, this guy's car is found there abandoned. And it gets reported 2 to 3 days later. There it is. And the car comes back to Kenneth McDuff. And there was a pivotal moment in which an FBI agent that was there investigating her disappearance is walking into the federal courthouse in Waco, and 2 U.S. Marshals, Mike and Parnell McNamara, straight out of the Old West. The McNamara family has been in law enforcement in Texas for 119 years. They go way back as marshals. I mean, they're anything you would think of Tombstone, they're it. They're walking out to meet Federal Prosecutor Bill Johnston, who's now the co-host on my podcast, but is in the movie that we're doing and everything else. But this young FBI agent in passing is walking by them and says, "Hey, guys, does the name Kenneth McDuff mean anything to you?" They knew his history. And they stopped dead in their tracks and said, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Well, his car has been found abandoned near where this girl disappeared." And Marshal McNamara, Parnell McNamara, who's now the sheriff of McLennan County, says, "Well, I'll tell you what, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to know that Jack the Ripper is standing right there with a knife. You better go get him." And so The prosecutor, who really didn't know McDuff's history, goes to lunch with him. He hears what this guy's past crimes are. He's out. And he was like, okay, we got to start hunting for him now. They go to prosecutors and state prosecutors, and nobody wants to step up and do it. Everybody's like, well, there's no PC. There's no probable cause. And Bill Johnston, who really is a hero in this, says, there's got to be some probable cause. And he finds the girlfriend of someone who hung with him some, that had been with him when he purchased one tablet of LSD at Austin, and they tracked down what group that LSD tablets from, because they would stamp their packages with a certain symbol. And on what he would say was very flimsy evidence, they got a warrant to hunt for McDuff for one tablet of LSD. And so they start their own posse, the two marshals and this prosecutor, that eventually becomes one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. All the top marshals come in, an enormous task force. The reason they did it was that, look, it's pretty obvious here, and we're concerned that every day he's out, he's killing another woman. And they don't know at this point. They have no idea how many women he's killed. It's only after he's captured they start figuring it out. But they stepped up, they were courageous, and they did it. And they got the guy. Before they got him, they think other women died as they were hunting him. But that's sort of the dedication and going beyond what's really required of the job that we tell in this story. And that sort of gets lost in the criticism of law enforcement today. Are there bad cops? Sure, there's bad cops. There's bad surgeons, kill people on the tables every day. But,
Yeah.
But don't negate the contributions that these people make. And one of the things you will see certainly in the television series is the personal toll that all of these officers have kind of paid. Marriages broke up, other issues, because they literally just became obsessed and put their whole life into, we're going to get him.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. Where, like, personally, they they don't end up rich. They don't end up.
No.
They don't end up even with a happy marriage. Like, sometimes they end up alone. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And it was a sense of finding justice. In this case, one of the big drivers was that it's unusual in that McDuff had an accomplice. There was a witness. We don't get this kind of information with serial killers. And the witness, he cracks and turns himself into the police at some point, because he really just can't live with what had happened. And so we get out of the witness, we get a very graphic description of how a sadistic sexual serial killer operates, what he does to their victims, and the torture that takes place and the suffering of this woman. And I can't say it here. It's unthinkable.
Yeah.
Unthinkable. And I had a moment in which I was already investigating how he'd gotten out of prison and corruption in the system, and I kind of crossed paths with their manhunt. But after he was captured in Kansas City, brought back to Waco, I'd done a live newscast. I was asked to come up to the marshal's office. And I go up, and there's a real somber mood. There's not any high-fiving, we did it. There's a somber mood. And Marshal Parnell McNamara reaches in his desk drawer, and he pulls open the drawer, and he pulls out this statement, and he slides it across the table, and he says, I can't give this to you, but I want you to read this. And I'm not supposed to even let you read it. And there's a senior marshal in the background going, oh, God, what's he doing? Shaking his head. And I read this thing, and I thought, I'd been in wars, and I'd seen stuff, and I thought I was numb to a lot of stuff. But this is horrific. And as I read it, I'm thinking, this poor girl must have been praying to God, take me now, I need to die. I can't take any more of this. And so I read it and I slide it back across the table. And he says, we've done our job now. Now you do yours and find out how this monster got out. And I did do that. But they really didn't give it up. As his execution date approached, they all stepped back up and said, hey, here's one last chance. There's all these missing women. Let's see if we can't find where some of them are and give peace to the victim's family. And they really wanted to give peace to the young woman who that confession centered on.
Yeah.
Because in court, her sister had heard parts of the confession. And I remember even talking to a reporter I knew, and Rebecca was telling me as she sat there and she heard that read, she was thinking to herself, one, oh my God, there are other victims' families in this courtroom that have come to see this, and now they know what happened to their daughters and sisters. And then she's like, and I can't take this myself. It was that horrific. So horrific. And as I talk about everybody being touched, this was the thing. It was just the evil aspect of this man that got to all of the investigators, why they were driven to him. And everybody to this day, 30 years later, is haunted about it. So much so that the reporter, Rebecca Rodriguez, I call her. She's out of news, and she's in PR now, but I hadn't talked to her in a while. I texted her, and a long text, hey, I haven't talked to you in a long time, what have you, And by the way, we're doing this television documentary about, and I really want to talk to you about Kenneth McDuff. And she said when she came to that name, that last name, she jumped up from her desk and she ran into the restroom and threw up. Because it brought back these horrible memories.
So you, as a guy that has kind of hunted these people from afar, has any of them ever found out you're hunting them and tried to kill you? Or harm you?
Well, back during my investigation, I started exposing that people were paying money to get out of prison, including McDuff, but many, many others. And when I did that, there were a lot of people sitting in prison that had hopes of getting out, and now, and so there were threats being made, and the prosecutors wanted to put U.S. Marshals in my home and stuff, and I was like, I can take care of myself. Now, fortunately, once McDuff was caught, and there was such a scandal over him, the legislature passed what were called the McDuff laws, and it meant life meant life without parole. It meant longer sentences for all of these people. They were building more prison beds. And suddenly, McDuff, all that anger and everything else, it got centered on McDuff to the point that it would be a badge of honor to kill him in prison. So the man is on death row, but has to be put in the depths of kind of solitary inside death row to protect him from some inmate that wants to make a name for himself. Yeah. So
amazing how that can work.
Yeah. So it got the heat off me.
Man, so crazy being that close to so many crazy people. Do you ever feel like you're going crazy as you're investigating crazy people?
No. I after being in Iraq, I can appreciate what soldiers go through with PTSD and stuff. I do think there's limits to violence at all that this human psyche is able to process and everything. The unit we were with, the three of us and my crew, my videographer had been a Marine combat photographer in Gulf War. He had seen stuff. I'd seen stuff. My producer had been on the West Bank. We'd all seen violence and war in our careers, but no one else in the unit had. Young people and all. And I remember some of them talking, I was thinking, boy, you do not know what is coming. And so there were things tough for us to handle. As an embedded reporter, you knew everybody in the unit. You had I did stories, and the kids were later killed, and I'd done stories about it. So all their family had left was my story. So that the mental impact, I get it. I get it. And then I think about the sustained violence the combat troops have experienced with all those deployments, and then the separation from families and what that does. I can see it. And then the ones that were in the roadside bombs that, there's no physical injury that's manifested, but we do know now with a lot of research, bad things happen to your brain in those from the blast pressures. And our unit was hit by friendly fire. We had a missile come in and blow up near us. And I ended up with quite a trouble with vertigo and other issues in the wake of that. So for the soldiers that were in Humvees getting blown up, but they're not burned, I get it. I've been there.
Did you ever find any of those?
No. When we arrived in country and we were embedded with a Patriot missile unit, the air defense unit that's designed to shoot down incoming Scud missiles or enemy aircraft, mainly the Scuds that Saddam had. We were embedding with them. We were originally going to embed with the 101st Airborne, and we went out and spent time at Fort Campbell, met General Petraeus, who was the commander, and the more time we spent with them, they were doing what was called mount training. They were training for door-to-door fighting in villages and stuff like that. And they're air mobile. They come in helicopters, and we were like, boy, even with our reduced amount of gear we have, we'll get killed coming out of the helicopter door. So their reports started to come out about the Scud missile threat. And I knew from Gulf One, I'd covered Gulf One, that I remember all the footage of them coming into Israel and other places. And I thought, okay, it'll be a great television story, certainly visual story. We really won't truly be in harm's way like you are with a front combat unit. So let's go in bed with one of them. And so we do, and we go through training at Fort Bliss down in El Paso. And so when we finally arrive in country, we're on the last plane out. We get in the desert, and we go on this mobile command post, and the commander is in there, and he said, well, he tells everybody to shut the doors and leave. He says, listen, we need to have a talk. We've learned that intelligence indicates there will be a lot of Scuds come in with chemical weapons on them. Now, we'd all gone to chemical warfare school to learn how to wear the suit and everything properly. And there are even reports that the desert where we're coming has been seeded with anthrax. But he said, here's the bad news. This unit has been tasked to go at the tip of the spear in front of the infantry and everyone, because the 101st Airborne cannot get there, does not want to come into country until we are up in the middle of the country with air cover, because they're afraid they would get, quote, slimed by chemical weapons. And then the whole division is out of business with helicopters. And so the Pentagon's calculated the casualty rate. We're going to suffer a lot of casualties according to the calculations. And so I want you guys to know this. And we're looking here, so they're like, so we chose not to go with the 101st Airborne, and that's too dangerous for them. We're going. And he said, so listen, I understand if you want to back out. And we're like, we've been around this game a long time. We're like, back out? Man, that's where the story is going to be. Back out? What are you talking about? You were going to call up CBS and say, oh, we've had to change our heart here.
Yeah.
And so there we go. And we were there when the first incoming Scuds were shot down. And they fortunately did not have chemical warheads on them. And certainly in our group, that was never encountered. And, there's been plenty of evidence since then presented that it was all overinflated.
Yeah, why did we believe them? I mean, they kind of seem like North Korea, like not super sophisticated. So I'm always surprised that we believe that they actually had like.
Well, now we found all kinds of evidence of it.
Okay.
After Gulf War, labs and everything. Remember, they were trying to build some nuclear stuff, and the Israelis had hit the reactor. No, we found a lot of evidence after that, and so they sort of had become the boogeyman. And I will say that I believed what the administration was saying, and the reason I believed it, back in 1998, I had done this series on the threat of weapons of mass destruction, and I had seen that a lot of federal money was suddenly being kind of quietly pumped out to cities to upgrade their fire rescue departments on how do you respond to this with hazmat units. And they were setting up special FBI units on, how do you do hazmat investigations of, be it a chemical weapon, biological weapon. And in the course of that, I had a long interview and series with a former head of the biological weapons program for the Soviet Union who had defected. He had a PhD in anthrax. And under President Nixon, we had struck a treaty to shut down any chemical biological weapons operations. And we did. The U.S. did. We did. We shut it down. The Russians cheated.
Shocker.
Shocker. They actually increased their activity.
Stupid Americans.
To the point of they ran tests. I'll give you an example. They ran tests where they had a particulate that was like anthrax, kind of the same size. It's got to be a special size to inhale and embed in your lungs. So it takes some sophistication to create it. They had actually had a substitute that they could measure, and they had put it in subway systems in the Soviet Union and measured the Venturi effect of what would happen when a subway train came through there. Where would it push it out? And they found out, oh my gosh, if we can get this into the New York subway system, we'll kill millions, because that system will just push it out all over the city. And so, I'd learned about stuff like that. And so when the administration started talking about it, I thought, well, this is plausible. This is plausible. And then what really got me was when Colin Powell gave that presentation to the UN about mobile biological weapons units and stuff, now of which we know was based on very thin, flimsy intelligence. And, I think he said he regrets the day that he did that. He kind of got used. But when I heard him say it with the kind of respect he had, and I had heard about him way back when I was a investigator in the Defense Committee, he had a stellar reputation, had been instrumental in trying to really bring professionalism and high education to the Army in the wake of Vietnam. But when I heard him say it, I thought, okay, here we are. And, we wore that chemical warfare suit for days on end, and turned out, nothing. Nothing.
Okay.
So you have to go back and think about the time period. I mean, the nation was reeling from 9/11, and hey, people wanted revenge. They wanted,
I would like to go further into that, but the question I was going to ask that I forgot that now I remembered is, how did you go from major news networks to leaving that and saying, like, I'm going to launch my own podcast and launch my own thing?
Well, I didn't have a choice. It wasn't my decision to leave journalism. It left me at the broadcast news level. In 2008, when the recession hit, all of the major networks slashed their budgets. And I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of people laid off, typically veterans like myself who were high paid, big benefits and all, first to go. And they closed bureaus, and the quality really has never come back. And frankly, the networks didn't really like investigative reporting because sometimes you're clashing with big advertisers, and also they don't like the controversy.
Are there big pharma investigative reporters?
Probably not. But
doesn't Big Pharma just pay for all? Like, that's the only ads I see. I don't have TV, but when I'm at my parents' house, that's all I see on news networks is just pharma ads.
Yeah. Well, and so listen, you only have to go back to the cigarette industry and how big tobacco shut down the 60 Minutes investigation, and the producer of it left, and there was a movie produced out of it and all, but. Typically, big corporate journalism, they'll praise the awards and they'll sing, and they love to celebrate the awards. But at the end of the day, they don't really like it. It's litigious. I had some lawyers who would review my scripts, look at me, and I was like, but it's right. It's all accurate. Well, we know that, Robert, but we just don't want to get sued. They sue even if you are right. They didn't want the expense of defending it. And it was a time, too, that there was a huge shift in audience to the Internet. And so they were losing ground there. And so what I think has happened is that the CNNs of the world and all the cable channels and all, by 5 o'clock, it's really not news anymore. It's talk. It's opinion. Everybody's opinion. And there was a journalistic study done by one of the journalism schools, and they had found that with all the various network-owned affiliates, there had been, in the 2008 time period, dozens and dozens of hard-hitting investigative stories spiked, canceled, because they didn't want to take the heat. They didn't want to support it. I remember looking at my producer once and saying, when you're fighting your management harder than the crooks you're doing a story about, something's wrong. Something's real wrong. And, I had reached a point. I saw the best and the worst. The best in the early days, I had incredible management and support. When I was investigating Kenneth McDuff, for example, and calling out the parole board chairman as corrupt and involved in bribery and everything, and he was very popular and very politically connected. The management called me to Dallas concerned because nobody was picking up the story. Usually a big story, the wire services will pick it up, newspapers, nobody was touching it. And they were concerned. I was out there all alone, and they were like, Robert, tell us you're right. And I said, I got documents, I can defend every sentence and every story. And I was a newcomer to the state capitol, and I'd had reporters there, been there forever. And that's kind of one of the things can happen too. You get too close, there's kind of pack journalism and cronyism, and they were like, hey, this is a nice guy. You're really kind of off base here. They were trying to save me from destroying my career. But finally, once it all started breaking loose, everybody came on, many of which was even trying.
Always the story.
They were always, many of which trying to claim credit for what I'd done.
Look at Cosby, it's like everybody, I was listening to this series on him. It's like everybody wanted to protect him, but finally they couldn't anymore, and then everybody decided they would report on it.
Some of the fine reporting I saw done was by Farrow. You know what I'm talking about, on the started the whole Me Too thing. He brought down the
music producer guy?
Weinstein.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's his name? Mia Farrow's son. I've gone blank. But, he was at NBC. They shut him down and stuff. And he did quite what a piece of journalism. Talk about having courage, too. Like, where's my next meal going to come from out of this? So that is kind of one of the nice things about this alternative media today, that there are many, many more voices that can get the other sides and other aspects of the story out. I've got a friend in journalism that is reporting on border issues, and he broke a huge story about all the Haitians. And he actually went down there, went on the other side of the border, and everybody had been talking about, these poor refugees fleeing the earthquake and all. What he indeed found out was that they'd been in Chile for the last 6 years. They'd been in Haiti. They'd been in Chile and working, and they all had ID cards from Chile. And he collected them off the ground. They tried to throw them away because if they were apprehended with them, it was immediate deportation. And he explained, too, that they actually had been held in southern Mexico for a period of time. And then on this kind of day of grace in Mexico, the Mexican government just let them go, which raised the question to me was there something in the background going on between the U.S. and Mexico where they truly just said, we're going to embarrass Biden. We're going to turn this problem loose on him. So, he does it online. So there are these other alternatives for getting the rest of the story or the other story that you might not see in the mainstream. One of the things I have seen happen in the mainstream at some point is that they adopt a narrative and they don't kind of,
move from it.
They don't move from it. Don't confuse me with the facts. So for the consumer, for the citizens, it takes some work of trying to find, who is really accurate in reporting. And frankly, over the, people would ask me over the years, is the media, controlled by liberals, or if they were talking about Fox, there's a control. And my reply, and this is cynical, but was like, no, it's controlled by the almighty buck.
Yeah, it's controlled by advertisers. That's always been my thought.
And there are many people doing things, saying things, taking stands, or we're on this side, we're on that side. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's all about money, making a lot of money. And so didn't used to be that way, but I've seen that happen as well.
So when you left in 2008 or got let go, did you immediately start a podcast or did you do it independently and start, when did you dive into this and start kind of your own brand?
So when I got cut, suddenly you've been high paid, you got a big mortgage, you got 2 kids in college, and literally, boom, the axe falls. I was able to negotiate more of a severance, and I had a very, very popular blog on terrorism. It was read internationally. I'd learned, and I started it in 2004 after being embedded with my producer. And we had, I sort of taught myself the elements of SEO back in that day. Google was new. I actually went to Google personally to get them to index the website I was on. And CBS got very angry with me in New York when I said, they were like, why are you wasting time on this? And I was like, there is a huge audience way beyond the broadcast hours. And they were like, no, we're television. And they chewed me out about it. And so I decided this is going to be a secret. And so we started this blog, and we had, we had thousands of followers. We would look and see that intelligence agencies from other countries were following us. Like, for instance, one of the things we were the first people to break the story that Al-Qaeda was using the internet and to record all of their roadside bombings and post the videos to YouTube to recruit by. And we found these, and we hired translators and put them out there. We traced a whole recruiting operation for suicide bombers to Richardson, Texas, to a server farm in Richardson, Texas, operated by Hamas in this country. And we went into London and Birmingham, England, tracking this whole operation down. And so we were doing all this reporting around it and stuff. We had a quote, terrorism expert in the UK on air in gosh, it was 2005, early 2005, predicting that the transport system, the subway system in London, was going to be hit. And he had never done an interview, never done anything, but he'd become very concerned. We did that story in January, and then in June or July, there was that massive
I remember that
explosions on buses and in the subways, and I was like, there it is. And I had some executives at CBS fight me tooth and nail over putting that story in. So here was their actual objection was that, well, Robert, our viewer studies indicate, people, they're disturbed by this stuff, and they don't have any control over it. So we're just kind of alienating viewers. We need happy. And I had such a fight over it, all of us, that I knew that I was a marked man. And sure enough, that day those cuts came, I was at the top of the list of the station group in my team, top of the list. And I'll never forget a CBS executive came in and asked me to come to the front office, and one of my executive producers was like, waved me over to come in his office. Hey, what's that about? What's going on? I said, I'm about to be fired and you're next. And he went, what? I said, this has been coming, buddy. And it was. That was it. It was a bloody day. But it wasn't just us. It was everybody. But so I did have the internet knowledge. I'd really learned on the internet. And so I took my severance. I went out to SEO conferences, search engine optimization, which was basically the art of how do you get your content to rank in front of everyone else. Started learning that, and I hung out a shingle as a digital media consultant for business and worked with law firms and others and did video for them and everything, and did stories for them. But I've always at heart been a storyteller. I love telling stories, and you find that you're in consulting business. Your clients, one day they appreciate you, the next they don't appreciate your story. But I really had been studying podcasting, and I love the appeal of it, that it was simple. I used to say in television, going around with that crew and camera and everything, I called it the 400-pound pencil that we took to Iraq and other places. And now I could take a portable recorder and a microphone and just sit out in somebody's kitchen and talk to them.
Yeah.
And I had people in law enforcement and others that knew me urging me, saying, you really ought to do something with crime, and true crime is big. And I spent a year kind of studying things while on the side of doing business, because the business consulting was going to bootstrap the podcast, because you don't make any money starting. Starting off. And I found that there were a lot of hugely popular true crime podcasts with that I felt the hosts were kind of exploitive of victims, that giggly about some of it, and really didn't know what they're talking about. They never, like I said, they've never been inside the yellow crime scene.
So my wife listens to probably 14 true crime podcasts.
Yep.
It's just is it a more woman thing? Is like your audience more women than?
And I've brought her a cap right there. Okay. She's true. There you go. I did do a lot of research, and 80% of the listeners are female. And I found a research paper done by academics into all aspects of it, that helped me understand things. So, for instance, my logos and everything were designed by a focus group of women. What we've learned from the research, and I also hear it from listeners, is that often, like serial killers, they want to know, could I have recognized it? Could I have survived it? Is my significant other in bed with me tonight? Are they one of these? That sort of thing goes on.
Do they? So I look at conspiracy theorists or conspiracy theories, the more crazy stuff, like I looked at Alex Jones like everybody else and think this guy's crazy, right? And then he was on Joe Rogan, and they decided they would fact check everything he said, and everything he said they were able to fact check. And I thought, okay, well, there's a lot, and he said some crazy stuff, but they were able to find, evidence of it. And I just remember thinking, okay, maybe there's more than what meets the eye. And I find that in a lot of things in life. And so have you ever thought that you, as like a guy that has always found truth and seek truth, and as a really great journalist, that you could take conspiracy theorists and either debunk them or be like, look, there's actually some facts here? Have you ever thought about?
Well, oftentimes there are facts in there. So we've got an episode coming, and I want to tell you, I don't know what the whole truth and the full truth is in this thing, but it is an episode about a fugitive, and I'm doing a series on fugitive hunters. And life of crime, bright guy, was a pilot, smuggling drugs out of South America in, flying drugs and stuff, but also was a bank robber and would fly to the scene of his bank robberies, and had two lives, two different families. And actually with the other identity, had a security clearance and a pass to a naval weapons depot in Oklahoma. Oh, yeah. Was friends with the district attorney. But he's flying out of, and he crashes. The whole thing comes undone. He crashes at the airport in Mena, Arkansas. Now, you want to know conspiracy theories? Go Google Mena conspiracy. The Clintons, CIA drug running and arms running to the Contras, you name it. It's all wrapped up into there. Barry Seal, drug smuggler, used to really snare Noriega in a sting that occurred when I was covering the Reagan White House. He's out of there. Then he's later murdered and by a hit man in Louisiana. It's all there. So this episode is going to fly you right into the center of this conspiracy theory. There's a lot there. And I want to tell you, a lot of stuff, I tried to fact check it and all, but we're just going to kind of put it out there. Here it is, folks. Now, for our guy, we got most of the facts and what all went on, but there's still even a mystery surrounding him because he crashes. He was killed in the crash, but the plane had maybe $350,000 cash on it, and the first to the scene were local law enforcement, and the money was never seen again. There was no money on the plane, It's all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, because I just think there is a growing, the older I get, the less I trust the media, and the less people I'm around and people online trust the media. Mm-hmm. Because we say stuff like, hey guys, I think that natural immunity could be just as good as a vaccine. Like that's what a lot of research shows. And then Facebook bans my post. I'm like, okay, well, this seems suspicious. Like it seems like if this is so dangerous, why would they would just leave it up, right? Like it's weird that like I get more and more suspicious of things. And when I see that, Joe Rogan took ivermectin and they're like, oh, he took horse dewormer, and they ran his main line, like CNN is running, they took horse dewormer. Yeah. And he's like, I was prescribed this by a doctor. This is ivermectin. It's not they have a horse version, I guess, but this is not what I took, and you knew that I didn't take that. I'm worth $200 million. I'm not, and so I see that and I think, wow, I really don't believe this. And what I've decided I want to do is I want to I want to explore things more than I used to. But two, I want to support private journalism. So subscribing to people's Substack, subscribing to people's Patreon, supporting it privately. Because I know that we have customers that pay us monthly, and that helps our business a lot. And so I think, man, if there are reporters that are doing good work and that I trust and care about the facts and data, I would love to support them and become a premium subscriber. And
there is lots of good work being done out there that way. There's a former DPS intelligence officer. His specialty is the cartels, named Jason Jones. Jason is all over the border. He's a contributor to one of the conservative networks. What he's finding really shouldn't be labeled liberal or conservative in terms of what he knows, learning about the cartels. I think his blog is called Tripwire or something like that. But, what he is turning up doesn't fit the narrative of the mainstream, so he's never there. He's not there. The other report I told you about, Todd Bensman, of finding that all these Haitians are actually from Chile, doesn't fit the narrative, and so you don't see them on the mainstream. And they end up on the conservative channels, and then, of course, people that go, well, see, there you are. You're a nut. You're a tool of them and stuff. So it can be hard to find an outlet for just the facts. Everybody, because whoever you associate with, you get branded with it.
Yeah, and the thing is that any rabbit hole can go as deep as you want it to go. Mm-hmm. And so there's a Instagram account called Unwoke Narrative. So they're like, hey, we just promote just straight facts. And they were posting that, Pfizer had $36 billion in profits or whatever this year, which is, up from last year or something. And so
hey, listen, everybody can go on Edgar.com and get their 8K and 10Ks and find out what that's all about if you want to dig.
I share that, and my friend's like, hey, you're sharing this and you're saying that their profits are up, and you're automatically equating it to because of the vaccine, but we don't know if it's from the vaccine cells. And then he was like, is there a problem with them making a profit from the vaccine if they develop something great? And which my only response was, if they developed it without the U.S. government funding it and paying for it and giving them special clearance to release it early and not allowing them to be held accountable if it goes bad for people, then sure. But you shouldn't be able to profit for something that the government spent something like $50 billion giving them money to develop and has said, hey, you're not liable if this goes wrong.
Well, look at all the money the government doled out in 2008 to financial institutions, many of which were just corrupt, and it caused the problem. Yeah. They didn't give it to the people. I remember seeing some information that was put out there that every homeowner in America could have just paid off their mortgage. They could have just done a grant and really stimulated the economy that way.
So crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, that every time I mention that college is BS, somebody goes, it's about the network you get there. It's about the network. It's about the network. And then all of a sudden I realized they don't market it as they market themselves as a educational institute. So the goal should be education if you market yourself as an educational institute.
Also, I've got a good example of that. At A&M, the Memorial Student Center, which is it was built after World War II, but it honors Aggies who've died in all wars, is the headquarters for many, many student organizations. There weren't that many when I was there, but there are everything you can imagine. When I was there, we called it, and we called the Cadet Corps and other organizations as your other education. You were encouraged to get that other education. Go over to the Memorial Student Center. Get involved in those organizations. Get involved in student government. And I have to say, as a high school student, I was a good student. Had a part-time job, was learning to fly and stuff like that, but I never even thought about trying out for the class play or other extracurricular stuffs at high school. Not at all. Not public speaking. Nothing. Never thought of it. Never even thought I could be popular. Those organizations at A&M and encouragement from the faculty, I came into my own. I was elected to the Student Senate, even defeated the commander of the Cadet Corps for the Student Senate, which was a big, big feat because the Corps voted in a block. I Was a chairman of a committee in the Memorial Student Center that, and as the chairman, I kind of changed it up. It's called the Contemporary Arts Committee, but we would bring writers and filmmakers and people from the arts to campus. But it had always been, they came and gave just one speech and vanished. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. They're going to come for 2 to 3 days. University's paying their expenses. They're going to come and they're going to go to classes. And they're going to go with small groups of students as well. And so I got exposed to all kind of other people, and so did the students. At that time, I did see students that were what we would call dorm rats that, God, studied day and night, and they were and didn't get a fuller, broader education into people, And so that's what what we called it there, the other education, was really the big benefit of going to Texas A&M to me, as well as the professors who were mentors they never told me what to do, but they were really good at helping me make a decision and how to make a decision.
Do you think it's kind of messed up that a college can charge anything they want because the government will give the student a loan to pay it?
Yes. Yeah, I've seen many cases of students that I've run into many cases of students waiting tables that did a year, it didn't work out, and they're saddled with all this debt, and they went off to that university. They didn't really want to know what they wanted to do.
Yeah, and so to me it seems like I equate colleges with like payday loan places, like just preying on people. And I'm obviously talking for business. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking for doctors and lawyers. Like everybody wants to yell at me when I say this.
Yeah.
And it's just pretty crazy to me that I think it's going to become that way. I think eventually as a society we'll agree that, this is one of the, if I could charge people $200,000 for websites and then them know that the government will give them a loan to pay for the website every time, we built a lot more $200,000 websites.
But in the case of student loans, the government comes around to collect it, and it's not exempt from bankruptcy.
Like all other loans.
Yeah, it's going to haunt you. I think there needs to be more help for young people about what they want to do with their life. Maybe some need a gap year. They need time they need to go.
Yeah, there's this weird thing where we really think people should go to college right after high school.
Yeah.
But if your brain isn't fully developed till you're 35, if you're a guy, and 30 if you're a woman, it actually would kind of make more sense for you to hold off. Especially if, it's all about maturity, Like I was a 70-year-old man when I was 12, and I still kind of live like that. My goal is to be like my grandfather's generation, the great generation. Like I really think that way. I like that generation, the generation that says we don't care about feelings, we care about providing for our family. We don't, we do what we say we're going to do. Like I never miss meetings, I never show up late, I dress like this. And I really adore that generation, and I feel like college preys on, college has said, okay, it's not about education anymore, it's about experiences, and they've just made the college like a giant waste of time that's a lot of fun that the government will pay for.
No, I do see that. I do run into these cases of kids that are financially underwater because they went off into a major that it sounded good and they were starstruck by it, but they weren't ready for it. Maybe weren't even prepared for the rigors of college, and now here they are, stuck. Like I say, the program that really helped me, and I've got a group of classmates. We've talked about this. We all talk about this. That for us, it was that for that period of time when we were at A&M in our particular curriculum in architecture, it was just a gift. It was just amazing. Now, all of us, we probably couldn't have even made it to college if not for A&M. I mean, it was a land-grant college, military-based. My first semester, my freshman year, the tuition was $50. And that was still hard for a working class family. And it got raised to $100 the second semester, and there was almost a riot on campus over that. No social issues, just that, because it was going to be tough. But we were all. It was tough. I mean, you see, to pay it because we were paying it ourselves, or our parents were paying it. There wasn't any student loan coming. Or if you're an ROTC, you're getting some ROTC money.
I guess what it seems like to me is like when you go to a hospital and you say, "Hey, I'm a cash payer," they're like, "Oh, it's 90% cheaper," right? And so if colleges did like, "Hey, I'm not on a loan," I feel like it'd be 90% cheaper. I feel like the government has become the insurance company that has inflated the cost of college. And to me, it's one of the greatest businesses to be in, because the government just gives you, like, you prey on stupid kids, and then people do a bunch of things on pride. It's like I have an investor in my company who donates $1 million a year to a university, which he hates. Can't stand anything about them. And when asked why, he's like, "Well, I got to keep the family legacy alive because they have a couple of buildings named after them. Yeah. And his grandfather worked there, or his dad worked, like hundreds of years ago." And I thought, can you imagine hating something and then giving it $1 million a year?
Yeah. The other concern,
it's ego.
Yeah, no, this is controversial, but just my experience of being around an academic institution, you get this feeling there are a lot of professors mailing it in, and I want to look like you're teaching a business class. You have no idea the rigors of business today and what they're going to face when they come out. I was also fortunate that some of my professors were adjunct, and that they had businesses. I remember a construction science class. The professor had a construction company. He was an Aggie, and he just loved giving back. He loved teaching. But, you find the adjunct professors are often the ones with all the experience. They're not paid. They're squat. The full professors are
see, the whole system is messed up.
Are getting the money.
But everybody defends the university.
Yeah.
It's like University of Texas makes $100 million a year off their football team, pays their employees / their players nothing, and that's modern day slavery. I mean, I don't know what else. You can say that. Because the vast majority of them aren't going to go to the NFL after.
Yeah.
And they're not trying hard at academics because they're playing football. And so it's like there's a chance if you're making $100 million a year off your team that you could pay your players. And so it just seems like universities are corrupt and disgusting, from slavery to from slavery of their players to charging ridiculous sums of money because they know that people can get loans for it. And that nobody will come out against them.
You don't plan to send your kids to college, do you? They're not going to get in. They're going to hear this podcast, and you're on the list. No admittance list. Well, kids that are paying this kind of money and going there, you better make it a job. You better look at that as your job, because the investment of it is. You better come out of there with some great networking, mentors.
All things that college isn't marketed at. It's marketed as an educational institute.
Yeah.
So it's all these things I agree. Like I really want to go to Wharton and get my MBA there. And I have enough business experience that I can, some MBA programs will let me start without an undergrad because they understand that I've built a couple 7-figure companies. Yeah. I don't think Wharton would be one of those schools, keep in mind. But my only reason wanting to go to Wharton is because I want to go to a school where other people are going to Wharton, right? Like that network is huge there.
Yes, yeah.
And so I see the power of all these things. But I think there's a corrupt organization running it, and nobody wants to call them out for it. And then this is what Peter Thiel says co-founder of PayPal, billionaire. Sure. He says that it's 2.6 like $1 trillion of student loans that continue the circle. So he's like, if you go $100,000 into debt to go to a university, well, then now you have to support the university. You can't then go against it because you just spent $100,000 with them. So he's saying that like the debt pays for the reinvestment of why it's so great.
You know, I ran into a small town newspaper reporter from up in the Northwest, and good Lord, maybe she was making $25,000, maybe less, as a reporter, first job. And I asked her about a story, and her first year, she had gone to an Ivy League school and got herself for the first year in student loan debt to around $80,000, and realized I can't sustain this. And so she went back to the Northwest, went to a state school to finish. But here she is and then she gets out. There's no jobs. You know, we know what the job climate has been. So she's ended up in small town Texas, this little paper, not making much money, and that huge student debt hanging over them. And I even want to say to some of these journalism schools, what are you doing? There's not the jobs out here. Why haven't you kind of pivoted your program to what there are jobs for, of writing, telling stories? But there's not. You know, I've got a friend in New York. He was a producer at 60 Minutes. He was the executive producer at one time of CBS Evening News. He's got a little video production company there, and you know, one of the universities was wanting to send him like 13 interns and all. And we were talking about it. He was like, what are they going to do? They're spending so much money on tuition. He said, there's just not the job. I'm not going to be able to hire any of them when they get out. There's just not enough jobs for that, occupation. Maybe you should go into computer science. But
if it was $4,000, it'd be no problem. It's $4,000 a year. You spend $16,000 over 4 years for an education. Wouldn't it be an issue?
Yeah. There's kind of, I don't know where you address it, but there needs to be some really thought put into what I want to make of my life, what I want to discover. Listen, at A&M, I bounced all over the place. It was a real personal growth and learning experience for me. I mean, I went in wanting to fly jet fighters. I'd learned to fly in high school. I thought, well, I'll sign up for electrical engineering, and because that'd be a good thing to know on aircraft systems. And I remember going to freshman chemistry the first day, and I'd been an A student in chemistry in a little rural high school, and I went in there and went, oh my God, I have no idea what they're doing here. And it turned out that was one of the flunk out classes. And so, then I'm kind of floating around, undecided, trying to find things. I always had a innate talent for drawing and art, and growing up doing stuff, making stuff with my hands. And that sort of led me eventually to construction and architecture. And the other attractive thing was that you didn't have to take chemistry. For art, you had to have the physics and the math. I was always good with that. Didn't have to do that. But it took me a while.
Now imagine if you then finished with $500,000 over your head.
Oh, no, I'd have been up the creek.
See, it changes everything.
It does. But it took me a while to figure out what I want to do in life and what am I, that sort of thing. And I will say, I think probably I had some of the similar traits to you as a teenager. I was more of an adult in a teenage body in a sense. The jobs I had, I dealt with adults. I was good with working with adults. Frankly, wasn't that good with fellow teenagers, stuff. Did I do some crazy stuff? Yeah, not as crazy as some of the others I knew. But so I did have some maturity, I think more than other people. but still, it was tough to find your way. I do think that many of us at A&M at that time period had come there from rural areas, and the parents, this was our only chance to go to college, and you were serious about it. You're really serious about it. I remember, it was at the time, I remember my dad looking at me and said, I know you'll do well at A&M because the Marine Corps has got a slot free in Vietnam if you don't. It's the Vietnam War. And your grades were each semester were sent to the draft board where you live.
What?
Yes. If you weren't making the grades, you were on your way. You're going to be drafted.
What a crazy time.
Yeah. And then they had a lottery. I'll never forget at A&M. Everybody gathered around the television set, and they were drawing balls out of just like you see on the gambling. They were drawing balls with people's birthday, and that would decide, okay, if I think my birthday was drawn as number 48. So if you had the list of birthdays from 1 to 90, oh baby, you're getting drafted. You're going. You're in the pool. Yeah,
crazy.
All
right. So, what's the next 20 years looking like for you? You got the podcast. You have the TV show. Are you doing more production, more podcasts, more? Are you doing less? What's coming?
Oh no, we want to do more. We've got we have so many ideas. My co-host. Love working with him. Very smart, thoughtful person. Great writer. We're working on a podcast, potentially a television series about Jack Ruby, who murdered Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged presidential assassin of Kennedy. Lots of conspiracy theory around that, but what is unique, my colleague, Bill Johnston's father, was a member of Henry Wade's team of district attorneys here in Dallas, and he was involved in the case, directly involved in that case. So there are things that we can address smartly about the conspiracy theories that surround him, and was he put up by the mob to do it? There's all sorts of stuff around him, and it's just fun chasing down a story and kind of unraveling it and I like telling a good story. So we're doing 3 types of stories. We do one called True Crime Reporter Extra. Typically, I'm the one doing those. They're very highly produced with music, sound effects, my narration, and then my questioning interspersed of one of the, it might be an FBI agent, or it might be a U.S. Marshal, or it might be the bad guy of that. And we weave that together. And as you know from doing a podcast, when you do that, those are hard to do. They're expensive. That's a lot of time, effort. We get music licensed. We license produce our own music for them. And then we're doing another one called True Crime Confidential, and those are traditional police procedurals. And we found out in experimenting that people really do like for somebody who knows what they're talking about to break down a crime. You came to the crime scene. Here's what it was. How did you solve it? So I lead Bill through some of his cases that he's done, which are really interesting. I mean, he did, everything. And then we have on detectives and others, marshals, and we do the same with them. And it's just like you and I talking, but it's, step by step. It's CSI without the technology. And then we've got a third segment we're excited about doing called Texas Ranger Files. And Bill especially has had a long time working relationship with the Texas Rangers. I've had a contact with them, and they don't talk. And Texas Rangers primary mission is to work in rural counties and help bring in the expertise to solve murders that the locals don't have in a small county. And you don't really hear about their stories anymore because small town newspapers are gone. And so we're going to be bringing on current and retired Rangers to talk about these stories. And, we have a saying, our true crime stories are stranger than fiction. You just can't make, you just can't make this stuff up.
All right. How do people connect with you? Website? What do you Google?
Just Google True Crime Reporter. Our website is truecrimereporter.com. You can listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on all the channels, and we're on YouTube, which actually is the third biggest source for podcast listening in America these days. And we're international, and we're about to launch in Australia, in New Zealand. We have done some rebranding of our graphics. It's real Texas now, because what we have found in the first season, the audience, not only the U.S., but the world, they love Texas. They love stories from Texas. And I found when I was a correspondent overseas, Texas was the best place to be from. And I used to introduce myself as I'm from Texas or I'm from Dallas. And you'd be amazed how many people still think that Dallas TV show with JR and the boys is still on.
Yeah, I every time I travel internationally and I say I'm from the States, they go, "Oh, are you from Texas?" Like, that's their first response. And then I go, have you visited Miami or New York City? And that's either one. That's the only places they visit. It's like they don't visit Texas. Too scary to them. They still think of it as like Wild West. But
and also for listeners, if they want to make a suggestion or tell us something they would like to hear about, fan at truecrimereporter.com. We're also starting up on Mark Cuban's new social audio platform called Fireside Chat. We just did the first ever pilot for them in which we were live broadcast remote on location. And so we took the audience to a crime scene and explained what had happened there. It was very popular.
So is this him copying Clubhouse?
It's different from Clubhouse in the sense that it's vetted. You really get vetted. They don't want any trolling. They don't want that sort of stuff going on.
I'm out.
Actually, the brains behind it is Fallon Fatima, and she was Fatimi. She was the youngest employee of Google, hired at 19. Is a tech wizard, launched a artificial intelligence company, whatever. It's really, she's the brains behind it. She came on with us live to do this. And it is different from Clubhouse in that aspect. They really are, and it's so that it's slow growth. Now, if I, as a creator, if I invite people to come join, they trust that I'm inviting people that are not going to be big troublemakers. You know how these days that in Facebook groups, one person can come in and spoil it. So that's one of the things we've found attractive. I've liked it because we now see it as a platform where we can go live remote on location. So literally yesterday, we began assembling a gimbal rig for our iPhone Pro Max 12. That's not a commercial, just for that big screen.
Yeah.
And how we could hook a wireless mic into it, so I can use a stick mic in the field and go around and talk to people and go to locations. And so we're kind of going to even work out the bugs of that later today. But that's what's really appealed to me. Saturday, I was with the sheriff in McLennan County, and they had this horrible child abduction case break. And it ended tragically. A 6-year-old boy, he escaped. He got away. The abductor he was a registered sex offender, had tried to break his neck. He got away. He still had his sister. I think she was 8 or 10. And the sheriff had his helicopter up, looking and following. And other units got into a chase, spotted him. And he decided to commit suicide. And it's made all the news over the weekend. But he was going 80 miles an hour and just went into the other oncoming lane and hit the car head on and killed him and the innocent driver of the other car. Mm-hmm. The girl was medevaced out, but that was a case that I thought, boy, if I could have gone live unfolding.
Have you heard of the Summer Wells case?
No.
She's this girl who her parents killed her in Tennessee, and she's still an Amber Alert, and they're still investigating it. But her parents are clearly drug users, and they talk about her in past tense. They're like, she was such a good, like the way they talk about her is like they clearly were involved, but somehow I guess they don't have enough evidence to arrest them yet or do anything.
Tough. There are tough cases. And, the Gabby Petito case has also raised the criticisms about, hey, what about all the women of color? And their cases aren't getting attention. I think this one is unique in the sense that, she was something of a social media star, and this is all kind of playing out online and has people connected. And so that sends it into the stratosphere.
Yeah, it just takes one person. Essentially, I think like a couple big podcasters talked about it, then it went viral. But I don't think it was, nobody was talking about it before then. And
yeah, in this case, we've got with Kenneth McDuff that we're doing the TV series about it. There was a young woman, 29-year-old accountant. He snatched in plain sight out of a car wash in Austin and never to be seen again on Fifth Street. If you know Fifth Street in Austin. Never to be seen again. And initially, they weren't giving it. The police really weren't kind of giving it that much attention. And her sister, Laurie Bible, man, she launched an old-style campaign. There was no social media, anything then, but she was on the television stations and the newspapers, and she started having events, putting out missing posters. I mean, she painted Austin with missing posters on her sister, and she really got a following from our television newscast, particularly from women. She was pounding the department, where they assigned another new detective to the case, who made a big break in the case. And so that is an example of how a family member became an advocate, and I mean a strong, strong advocate. She wasn't going to let detectives sleep until they solved the case.
Have you seen the Netflix documentary, The Pharmacist?
I have not.
So it's about this pharmacist who sees that like all these people are coming in prescribed. It's deeper than that. His son was killed and all this stuff, but essentially
opioids.
Yeah. And he discovers the doctor she's only open from like noon till midnight. So there's just like lines around her door, and she's got officers like on duty standing there at midnight guarding everything and like letting patients in and stuff and escorting patients out and stuff. And she's prescribing more opioids than anyone, thousands of. And he essentially was crucial in bringing her down because he wouldn't stop. He would film her, he'd report her, he'd do calling anybody, the FBI, DOJ, everyone. And it's like it really just takes one person who's a bulldog.
Yes. So there's that old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the greaser oil. And Laurie Bible was a squeaky wheel. I've got to hand it to her. So much so that when the corruption was discovered and how he gotten out and all, she became the big advocate testifying to the legislature about, you got to change the law. There was a moment in a hearing in which Cora Mosley, a member of the parole board who voted to release the serial killer, had admitted she never even opened his file and read it and approved him for parole. Never opened the file. And there was other corruption surrounding it, but
that's so crazy.
Laurie Bible walks into that Senate hearing, plops herself down beside Cora Mosley, and turns to her so everybody in the room can hear it and says, "Well, I guess you're the parole board member that's got my sister's blood all over your hands. Is it still dripping here today?" And Mosley got this horrified look, and she bounded out of that chair. But there were all these marshals and stuff sitting there that had been involved in the manhunt for McDuff, and they were like, "Way to go, Laurie. Way to go."
Robert, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
Time.
And True Crime Reporter, that's the podcast. Television show on the way called Freed to Kill.
Okay.
And we already have other episodes in the work, other seasons in the work, and it's about...
And is it going on Netflix or is it going...
I can't say right now, but it's a major streaming channel. But it's about... What this series will be about is the violent criminals released from prison who've killed before and it should never have been released. They were freed to kill. And then we've got a second series we're working on called Texas Crime Stories and one called Texas Ranger Files, Stories from the Texas Rangers. Both is kind of in the works.
Both those are TV series and podcasts?
And podcasts.
Okay.
And podcasts.
Turn here.